Last time we left off with this land speed car, I was about 5 miles per hour off of the existing record for my class. I went 261 miles per hour on a record of 266. But there were problems, and today we're going to fix them, because there is one more race at the Bonneville Salt Flats this year, and I still need that hat. The engine had damage in one of the cylinders, the gearing was too high, the nitrous oxide was not tuned properly, and there was a fourth problem that we didn't even know about until after we returned. We were so close to the record that we really only need to fix one or two small things to be able to break it. That cylinder damage could be fixed with a new piston and lapping down some valves, the gearing could be fixed with new sprockets, the nitrous could be tuned with a trip to the dyno, but there is another option. The original plan for this car was to compete in the 500cc category, half of the engine size that I'm currently using. The plan was to deactivate two of the cylinders, and since I have damage in one of the cylinders, deactivating two of them solves that problem. It puts us in a different class with a different record, but that record is a lot slower, about 180 miles per hour. So that's what we decided to do. Shut off two cylinders, change the gearing, and take it to the dyno to tune in the 500cc and also maybe tune in some nitrous oxide. But how does one deactivate two cylinders? How do you turn a 4-cylinder 1 liter into a 2-cylinder half liter? The way it's usually done in land racing is to replace the spark plugs with just plugs, just bolts threaded into the spark plug hole. We did this and added some copper crush washers at the bottom to make sure it's a good seal. There is a problem with this approach though, and that is that those two cylinders are still pumping air. A piston engine is an air pump, and pumping air takes work. It takes horsepower. So to effectively deactivate two cylinders and maintain maximum horsepower, we need to deactivate the valves. There is still loss from the piston friction moving up and down, and some loss from the compression and expansion of the air above the piston, but most of the work being done, the air pumping, is gone. For a long time, overhead cam engines used either rocker arms to open the valves or push down directly on the top of the valve through an inverted bucket, but these days a lot of high-performance engines, like the one in my race car, use finger followers. These go between the camshaft and the valve. They're great because they reduce the valve train mass. You get rid of the buckets and rockers so you can spin the engine faster. You can also have a more aggressive cam profile, allowing for more airflow at higher RPM. This is also great for me because to keep those valves closed and to turn this 1 liter into a 500, all I have to do is remove those fingers. That's it. You just take them out and put the engine back together. I really thought it would be more involved. With the valves deactivated and the dummy spark plugs in, we took the car back to the dyno, and things pretty much immediately went wrong. The engine was jumping like a misfire, but more violent. We thought it was maybe the camshaft or crankshaft sensor, but we weren't getting any errors. And then I remembered we had something sort of similar happening at the Salt Flats. You might have heard it in the intro to this video. We thought it was the tire slipping on the salt. It only happened in first gear, but that makes sense because your lowest gear always has the most wheel torque. It wasn't causing any other problems, and we had other stuff to worry about, so we didn't worry about it too much. But on the dyno, it was a problem. We tried tuning it in second gear and the problem went away, so it was only in first gear. At first, maybe I thought there was some damage on the gear teeth, but that doesn't really make sense. Something like that would be catastrophic. My guess is that we added too much pressure in the air shifter and bent one of the shift forks. This means that the gear would slide into place, but not enough to lock in. So the dogs, which are supposed to engage with the cogs, were not fully engaged, and first gear was slipping out momentarily before catching again. This is still a guess since I haven't disassembled the engine to check, but it does make sense. It was also getting worse. Also, the dyno had problems running in second gear. Because the car is geared high and the power is so low with only 2 cylinders, the dyno had trouble giving a smooth RPM sweep. So we switched to these smaller dynos, which are usually only used on the front wheels of all-wheel drive cars. This gave us an inaccurate horsepower reading, but it did allow us to tune in the nitrous. Just for fun, we tried running without the plugs in the engine, just open spark plug holes. This gave us a lower horsepower number by a few percent. This makes sense because without the spark plugs in, the piston is just moving air in and out, which is doing extra work that isn't helping. It was also super loud. But that first gear is a problem. The BMW transmission gearing is pretty narrow, and even with a lower speed of the 500cc record, it's going to be hard to start in second gear. This engine is pretty beat up. Cylinder damage, transmission problems. It might not be up to the task of breaking a record at the Bonneville Salt Flats. So I bought a new engine. By new engine, I mean a used engine, new to me. There were not a lot of these available, and they go for about twice as much money as some other liter bike engines. It ended up costing me $6,000, which I did not budget for. I spent an hour trying to schedule a delivery time with the shipping company before finally getting a hold of someone on email. I told them I'd be around all day tomorrow except between 11 and 1, and she scheduled my delivery for between 11 and 1. Fortunately, the guy showed up 5 hours late and then obliterated part of my tree. Anyway, the engine was pretty good. I bore scoped all the cylinders to make sure this one didn't have any damage like my last engine had. I did a leak down test on all the cylinders. 2 were good, but the other 2 did have a little bit of leaking. I pinpointed it to one of the intake valves on each cylinder. There is a lot of deposit buildup on the intake, and it's possible that some fell in and got smashed between the intake valve seat, allowing for some blow-by. So I'm just going to put the engine together, start it up, and check again. There was a broken bolt in one of the frame mount locations, but that came out pretty easily. I was drilling the center so I could use an easy out, but the drill just threaded the bolt all the way through to the opposite side. I did forget how much modification I had to do to this engine to make it work with my aftermarket engine control unit. I had to add a crankshaft sensor to the side of the crank, and I had to have SendCutSend laser cut me a trigger wheel that the sensor would pick up, and I had to weld that onto the crank. But before that, I had to grind away a bunch of aluminum so it would clear. This was all because the ECU couldn't read the sensor that came with the engine. I also had to modify the camshaft sensor trigger. This is machined into the exhaust camshaft. It has 3 lobes, 2 big ones and 1 small one. I had to grind down the 2 big ones so there was just 1 trigger for the sensor. I also switched that to a different kind of sensor. All this was just to make the engine work with the aftermarket ECU. By the way, you know how you're supposed to use distilled water with your coolant, but you just use water from the garden hose since it's way easier? Yeah, this is the new engine. This is the way it's supposed to look. And this is the old engine, filled repeatedly with hose water and then completely caked in salt. So maybe use that distilled water in the future. With the new engine installed and wired up, it started pretty much right off the bat. No issues at all. Well, one issue. I spilled oil on the headers while swapping the engine, so there was a lot of smoke that had to be burned off, but mostly no issues. Since we now have a good engine with no cylinder damage and no transmission problems, I decided to leave all 4 cylinders functioning. We're going to go after the same record we were going after last time. We're going to finish that quest first. I can deactivate the valves pretty easily. It takes less than an hour, so if things go really well, we could conceivably go for both records. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. One thing at a time. I let the engine get up to temperature and then went back and checked compression and leak down on all the cylinders. They were all great, between 195 and 200 psi, and there was less than 2% leakage on all the cylinders. This is a good engine, and if we find any damage in the future, it will be my fault. But I'll probably still blame Dave. One big problem we kept having at Speed Week is packing the parachutes. The parachute never goes in the same way, especially after it gets dragged along the salt for a while. It's always bigger each time. But it has to be kind of in the same place for the spring-loaded pilot chute to pop out and catch the wind. I added these adjustable inserts to go behind the parachutes, but we had to keep adjusting and readjusting them. Somebody had the idea of removing the spacers entirely and adding a cup at the back of the parachute that just holds the pilot chute and spring at the end. So I used the bamboo to print up some cups that slid into the parachute tubes. These are printed solid, so they should hold up well to the abuse, and actually they'll be attached to the center of the main chute, so they shouldn't really be dragging on the ground too much. I also needed smaller springs for the pilot chute, which I decided to make myself by bending stainless spring wire around some metal I had, and this was pretty sketchy. But it did work. Kind of. Anyway, this will make repacking the parachutes much easier. This car doesn't have an air box. I have a Naka duct for air inlet. These aren't great for pressurizing air, but they're pretty good for low drag air inlets. I'm not looking for ram air into the intake. What I lose in ram air I'll make up for in nitrous. But it is kind of a problem that this duct just dumps into the engine bay. It is sort of pointed at the air filter, but it would be better for both aerodynamics and power if this was a sealed inlet to the intake. So I designed an air box. This wraps around the air filter and has a flange to connect it to the Naka duct. I'll add some foam to seal these two together. I just started printing this, so it'll be a few hours before it's done. This should help give the car some more power and clean up the airflow for better aerodynamics. I also swapped in a new pneumatic valve for the shifting. I shift the car with a button that pushes an air cylinder through a valve. I used the same valve on my parachute, and we had a problem with one of those valves leaking and dumping the parachute too early, probably because I put the valves directly over the rear axle and above the exhaust, which is basically the hottest and most vibrating part of the car. So I bought a new valve and mounted it a little away from the exhaust and spaced it out using a TPU mount. TPU is a rubbery filament that you can 3D print. Hopefully this will isolate some of the vibration going into the valves. Anyway, we'll see how that works. One of the other problems I had was gearing. I chose sprockets that would put my top speed at almost 320 miles per hour, even though the record was only 266. This meant my acceleration was slow, and it took me the full length of the course to get even close to my top speed. So this time we're gearing it down to a top speed of about 280. To do this, I needed a new rear sprocket. I drew one up, two actually, and had Sen Cut Sen laser them out of mild steel. Then I chucked them up in the lathe and chamfered the edges. By the way, Sen Cut Sen now does CNC milling. I haven't had a chance to use this yet, but I am stoked to work with them on an upcoming project. So if you're looking for CNC work, check them out. We also fixed that tail damage that happened on the salt flats. I removed the cabinet drawer reinforcement and we patched it with some carbon fiber. I have this box of carbon fiber sitting in my garage that's covered in dust. We used that and also added some extra reinforcement with this wood block. There are better solutions for this, but this wood block was within arm's reach, so we just used that. Then I stuck some fiberglass over it to hold it in place. Unfortunately, we did not have room for a ham sandwich this time. Speaking of the tail, we messed up a bunch of the stickers with our trackside fix, so we cleaned up the area by removing anything that was starting to peel away. Then I found my stack of stickers that people sent in late, and we filled in all the empty slots with new stickers. There were a few other fixes. We adjusted the position of the push plate on the van to be more in line with where the car was when pushing. My God, that is a dirty van. Not going to clean it until after Bonneville, or maybe never. We have a few other things we could do before the event, but it's looking like we have a good shot at the record. There are, of course, about 100 things that could go wrong, including a rain before the event, but I think we've done about all we can do. I think we're prepared, especially with a new engine, which is great, although I did not have a new engine in the budget. So big thanks to today's sponsor, Opera. You ever have 400 browser tabs open? I do. My research style is chaotic. I might be looking at a few different engines from eBay or Marketplace, looking up power curves for engines and half a dozen other tabs, and with Opera, I can group similar tabs together in tab islands. So instead of having a mess of 40 tabs, I can keep things open and still know where to find them. Split screen is also great, very helpful when comparing two things, like two motorcycle engines that should be the same but probably aren't, or trying to make sure that what is being listed is actually what I'm looking for. Tabs also have traces, this highlighted line that's the brightest under your most recent tabs, which is super helpful for someone like me who has a bad habit of just clicking away from important stuff at the first distraction. The traces help me to find my way back to that thing I swear I was just looking at. The built-in music player doesn't need a whole browsing tab. It's easy to access and you can drag it anywhere, even outside of the browser, and it automatically pauses music when you start playing videos. Speaking of video, you can also detach video and drag it wherever you want it. Opera's free built-in AI tool makes finding the right information super quick. You can access it with a shortcut Control// or Command// and ask it pretty much anything. And you can use the links below the answer to verify or clarify any important information. It's a great place to start your research, and Opera is excellent at keeping all your information sorted and organized. Click the link in the description and give it a try. Used to be that you had to impress people to get people to watch your show, but now all you have to do is impress the algorithm. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. It actually helps the channel a lot. And of course, all hail the algorithm.